He watched her walk out the door with burning jealousy in his heart. He never thought he'd see her dressed like that for someone else.
Where are you going? It's not safe to be out at this time.
I have a date. I'll be back by 11.
He couldn't believe she was going on a date with another person. He sat there in the dark, angry and frustrated. But what you don't know is that Ryo was not just the jealous boss. He was also a playboy who brought different women to his house every other day, but couldn't seem to take it when his maid was going on one date. If this story already has you on the edge of your seat, then you know what to do. Smash that subscribe button right now and hit the notification bell, because this story has more emotional weight than anything I have told you before. And you are not going to miss a single part. Are you ready? Let's go back to the beginning. Odessa Cole grew up in Birmingham, England, in a house that was loud when it was happy and terrifyingly quiet when it wasn't. Her father, Marcus Cole, was a beautiful disaster of a man. He was charming and magnetic, and every woman in their neighborhood knew his name and his smile, which should have been the first warning. But her mother, Diane, had loved him completely, and without reservation, the way some women love men who don't deserve it, with their whole chest, with the best years of their lives. Marcus Cole had a problem with women, and not a small one. He liked them young, liked them new, and liked the excitement of something he hadn't touched yet. He cheated throughout the marriage with a consistency that would have been impressive if it weren't so devastating. Odessa knew before she was old enough to have the language for it. She saw the way her mother's eyes went distant sometimes at the dinner table. She heard the calls her father took in the hallway with the door half closed. She understood the shape of his betrayal long before she understood its name. When Marcus finally left, and he did leave, for a 22-year-old woman with no children and a smaller waist. Her brother Kofi was 9 years old. He cried every night for a month. Odessa, who was 19 at the time, sat outside his bedroom door and listened because she didn't know what to say, and she was afraid that if she went in and held him, she would start crying too and never stop. Her mother picked up a second job, then a third. The house got quieter in a different way after that. Not the frightened quiet of waiting for her father's car to pull in, but the exhausted quiet of a woman who had no more room for pain and had simply decided to survive instead. Kofi got sick the following year. It started small, the way serious things always do. Fatigue, then tests, then more tests, then a diagnosis that Odessa can still hear in the doctor's voice when she closes her eyes. Measured and clinical, as if the words weren't rearranging their entire world. The bills started. The savings disappeared. Odessa worked every hour she wasn't in class, but it wasn't enough. It was never enough. She watched her mother, age 5 years and 1, watched Kofi try to smile through hospital visits so she wouldn't worry, and she made herself a promise. She was going to build something that could hold her family. She was going to be the one who fixed it. Marketing had always been her thing. She was brilliant at it, understanding what people needed, how to reach them, and how to make something resonate. When the scholarship to study at one of Seoul's top universities came through, she sat on the bathroom floor and read the email 3 times before she allowed herself to believe it was real. Full scholarship. Dream course. An opportunity that didn't knock twice. She called her mother, who was in the hospital with Kofi. Diane cried. Kofi, from his hospital bed, gave her a thumbs up through the phone screen. Odessa packed everything she owned into 2 bags and got on a plane to Seoul. Seoul was overwhelming in the way that only cities with real ambition can be. Everything moved fast, everything was lit up, and everything seemed to be saying something to her in a language she was still learning to read. She had the scholarship. What she didn't have was a job, a social network, any grasp of Korean beyond what she'd picked up from a language app, or enough money to cover housing for more than 3 weeks. She spent those 3 weeks applying for everything that would work around her 5 hours of daily classes. Most places wanted fluency in Korean. Most places wanted someone with connections. Most places, when they saw her face, suddenly had no vacancies. It was a woman named Ji Yeon, a classmate who had taken quiet notice of Odessa's discipline and her situation, who mentioned it offhandedly, the way people mention things they think you'll probably turn down. A household position. Live in. Good pay. A man who needed someone discreet, someone who could manage a large residence, someone who didn't speak Korean. He's not a normal person, Ji-yeon said carefully. Define normal, Odessa said. Ji-yeon looked at her for a moment. He runs things in Seoul, quietly. Odessa understood. She thought about Kofi's hospital bills. She thought about her mother's second bub. She said yes. The first thing you need to understand about Gong Ryo is that he is not cruel. He is controlled. There is a difference. Cruel men hurt people because it satisfies something in them. Controlled men build walls so high and so thick that nothing gets in and nothing gets out, and they convince themselves this is strength. Ryo had been building his walls since he was 17 years old, watching his elder brother, Gong Taeseo, the warmest, most genuine person Ryo had ever known, fall completely and irrevocably in love with a woman their family would never accept. Her name was Yorim. She was not from a dynasty family. She did not bring connections or alliances or the right bloodline. She was simply the woman his brother loved with every cell in his body. The woman who made Taeseo laugh in a way no one else could reach. The woman who knew his brother's real face when the rest of the world only ever saw his position. The family made the choice for Taeseo. He was told he would marry someone's appropriate. He was told what he felt for Yorim was irrelevant. And Taeseo, because he loved Ryo, because he loved his mother, and because the weight of a dynasty is not light, complied. What happened to Taeseo's eyes? The way the warmth in them dimmed and never came back. Ryo watched his brother every day for years. He decided at 17, watching his brother's light go out, that he would not fall in love. He would not give anyone that kind of access to him. He would enjoy women the way his position allowed. Freely, briefly, without attachment. And when the time came for a marriage arrangement, he would walk into it with nothing to lose. It was a clean plan, logical. He had kept to it for 8 years without difficulty. Then he hired a black girl from Birmingham who looked at him like he wasn't a threat and changed everything without even trying. Odessa arrived at the Gong Mansion on a Tuesday morning in October. She had done her research. She knew who he was in the way that you know about powerful storms, abstractly, from a careful distance. She had dressed neatly, pulled her curls back, and kept her face composed. She was there to work. She was not there to be impressed. Ryo met her in the main hallway, and the first thing she noticed was that he was bigger than she expected. Wide through the chest, with a physical presence that took up space in a way that wasn't aggressive but simply was. His shirt had the sleeves pushed to his elbows, and the ink on his forearm was dark and deliberate. A pattern she couldn't read, but couldn't stop looking at either. His face was sharp, handsome in a way that felt almost unfair, with dark eyes that assessed her once and completely before he said a single word. She met his eyes and did not look away. He noticed that. "You don't speak Korean," he said in English. It wasn't a question. "I'm learning," she said. "But no, not yet." He studied her for another moment and then gave her a brief tour of the residence, where things were, what was expected, and what parts of the house were not her concern. He was efficient about it. No warmth, no unnecessary words. She appreciated that. It meant they understood each other. She started work that afternoon. He had a woman over by 8 o'clock that evening. Odessa passed through the main room to close the terrace doors, and the woman, tall, glossy, laughing at something he'd said, glanced at her the way people glance at furniture. Odessa closed the doors and went to her room. She sat at her desk, opened her marketing textbook, and told herself the tightness in her chest was nothing. Just first-day strangeness. Just adjustment. She did not think about his forearms. She did not think about the way he'd looked at her. She opened her textbook and studied for 3 hours, and was perfectly fine. A week became 2 weeks. 2 weeks became a month. Odessa settled into the rhythm of the house with the same quiet efficiency she brought to everything. She was good at the work, organized, discreet, and thorough. The mansion was large and the expectations were high, but she had grown up making order out of chaos, and this was simply a larger version of that. The pattern with Ryo became clear quickly. He left early and came back late. He had meetings she was never told about, calls taken in rooms with closed doors, and visitors who arrived in sleek black cars and left without eye contact. She registered all of it, said nothing, and forgot none of it, because she was not a woman who missed things. She simply did not make them her business unless they became her business. And the women. The women were consistent. Not the same woman. Never the same woman twice, or rarely. They arrived in the evening sometimes, or he brought them back late at night. They were always beautiful, and they always left in the morning. Odessa watched this happen with the same expression she wore for everything. Steady, unreadable, and calm. She would pass through the kitchen in the mornings and see them, wrapped in his shirts, reaching for coffee, startled to find someone already there, and she'd greet them politely and go about her work. What she would not examine too carefully was why, after the third or fourth time, something in her chest had begun to pull in a direction she did not want to name. She told herself it was instinct. She had grown up watching what a womanizer looked like and what it did to the people around him. She had a category for men like this, built out of years of watching her father. Her reaction was not personal. It was pattern recognition. That was what she told herself. Ryo, for his part, had begun to notice her in ways he hadn't anticipated, not just because she was beautiful, though she was, in a way that kept catching him off guard. The curve of her face, the fullness of her lips, and the way her curls moved when she walked. He noticed her, because she was the only person in his home who behaved as if his presence were ordinary. His staff deferred to him. His associates feared him. The women he brought home performed for him. Odessa Cole made his coffee, set his documents on his desk, and moved through his house with the unruffled confidence of someone who had nothing to prove and no reason to try. He found it, against every instinct he had, interesting. That was dangerous. He knew it immediately. He filed it away and ignored it. They connected, the way moments do between two people who are pretending not to notice each other. The first one happened 3 weeks in. She came into his study to leave a folder of documents on his desk and found him there unexpectedly, standing by the window, unbuttoning his shirt after a long day. His back was to her. The muscles of his shoulders shifted as his hands worked down the buttons. She stopped in the doorway. He turned when he heard her, and they were suddenly looking at each other across a room that felt half the size it actually was. His shirt open, the ink on his chest visible, neither of them moving. "I'll leave these here," she said, setting the folder on the desk without going further into the room. "Thank you," he said. She left. In the hallway, she stood still for exactly 4 seconds before she started walking again. The second one. She was in the kitchen, late when she thought the house was empty. She had gotten a call from her mother earlier. Kofi's latest results were not what they had hoped. The treatment needed adjusting, and the cost was going to increase. Odessa had done the math 3 times on her phone, sitting on the kitchen floor with her back against the cabinet, and each time the numbers said the same thing. She did not have enough. She would not have enough. She was not the kind of woman who cried easily or publicly. But, alone in the kitchen at midnight, the numbers on her phone screen blurring slightly, she let a few tears fall because there was no one to see them. Except there was. Ryo had come back late, and he stood in the kitchen doorway, long enough to see her face before she heard him and looked up. She wiped her eyes immediately and started to stand, but he held up a hand. "Don't," he said quietly. He sat down at the kitchen counter and was silent for a moment. "Tell me what's wrong." She almost said nothing. Almost. But something about the quietness in his voice, not soft exactly, but careful, made her answer honestly. She told him about Kofi, about the treatment, about the numbers. He said nothing for a long time. Then he said, "Go to sleep." She thought that was dismissal. She went to her room. The next morning, she got a notification from the hospital in Birmingham. An anonymous payment had been made against Kofi's account, enough to cover the adjusted treatment plan for the next 6 months. She stood in her rooms, staring at her phone, and then walked very carefully to the kitchen, made his coffee and set it on his desk without saying a word. He never mentioned it. Neither did she, but she knew. And he knew she knew. And something shifted between them that couldn't be shifted back. The third moment. The hallway, one evening when they both moved for the same doorway at the same time and stopped inches from each other. She looked up. He looked down. The house was completely quiet. For a full second, neither of them did anything. She could see the details of his face up close, the line of his jaw, the darkness of his eyes, and he was looking at her in a way that didn't have a name she was willing to give it yet. She stepped back first. He let her. Neither of them spoke about it. They started to talk sometimes, genuine conversations. In the evenings, when she was finishing something in the kitchen, and he came home less guarded than usual, he would ask her about her course. She would ask something small about Seoul. He had laughed once, quickly and quietly, at something she'd said, and she had looked at him sideways because she hadn't been sure he could. But the night of the real conversation was different. He came home earlier than usual, sat down in the main room, and asked her to pour him wine. She did. She was moving to leave when he said, "Sit." She looked at him. "Sit down," he said again. "You don't have to stand at the other end of the room when I'm here." She sat. Not close. But she sat. "You always want to be somewhere else when I'm around," he said. "That's not true." "It is," he said, without accusation. Just observation. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said what she hadn't meant to say. "Is Sandra or Natasha not available? I don't know which one you'd call tonight." The words were out before she could stop them. She heard the edge in her own voice and wished she hadn't put it there. He turned to look at her. There was something in his expression she couldn't fully read. "Is that jealousy? Jealous of you?" she said, and her voice was harder than she intended. "Or them? I'd never be with someone like you. You don't know what fidelity looks like. You don't know what commitment looks like. You wouldn't recognize it if it walked up and introduced itself." The words landed. She could see them land. His face went very still, the way faces go still when something has found a target. The silence stretched. Then he stood up, set his glass down, and walked to his room without a word. Odessa sat in the empty room. She had gone too far. She knew she had gone too far. She also knew, sitting there in the quiet, that the reason she had said it was not abstract principle. She was jealous. She could admit it to herself in the silence, even if she couldn't admit it out loud. She was jealous, and she didn't know when that had happened or what to do about it. Things changed after that. He started bringing more women home, sometimes 2 in the same week. Once he came back drunk in the middle of the night, and there was noise in the hallway outside her room that she lay in bed and listened to with her jaw tight and her eyes open. In the morning, she made breakfast, said nothing, and kept her face the same as always. But one morning, when a woman left and Ryo came to the kitchen, Odessa poured his coffee and then turned back to the counter. She started humming to herself quietly, something untroubled. He stared at the back of her head. Her not caring was worse than her anger. He hadn't expected that. He hated it. What Odessa didn't know was that the escalation was not desire. It was panic. He was bringing women home like a man building a firebreak, as if flooding the house with bodies could prevent the one thought that kept returning. The way she'd looked at him in the hallway. The way her voice had cracked just slightly when she'd said he didn't know what commitment looked like. The fact that she was right, and the fact that it had mattered to him that she said it. He had not wanted anything to matter in 8 years. He was exceptional at not letting things matter. And yet, one night he sat at a bar across the city, further gone than he usually allowed himself, and a woman approached him. She was beautiful, available, interested. He started talking to her, and then, halfway through the 3rd drink, heard Odessa's voice in his head. "You don't know what fidelity looks like." And put on his glass and said, "I'm sorry. This isn't something I can do tonight." He drove home. She was still awake, sitting at the kitchen table with her textbook open and her glasses on, and when she heard him come in she looked up and said, "You're back early," with the calmness of someone making an observation about the weather. He stood in the kitchen entrance looking at her, the alcohol making everything a little slower and a little louder than usual, and said, "I'm a catch, a very big catch, even for someone like you sitting up on a high horse." She looked at him, took off her glasses. He walked closer, closer than the kitchen required. "You think you're better than me," he said, and voice was low and not quite steady. "No, sir. she said quietly, and she was looking up at him now because he was standing close enough that she had to look up. Sir, he repeated. The word came out strange, almost amused. You weren't calling me that when you had all your opinions. I'm sorry, she said. Her voice was soft. I didn't mean to say it the way I said it. And she looked at him, and he looked at her, and the world did the thing it had done in the hallway. Contracted, went quiet, reduced itself to just this. He kissed her. Not gently, not tentatively, like a man who had been arguing with himself about it for months and had simply run out of arguments. She went still for half a second and then kissed him back with the same honesty she brought to everything, and for a moment that stretched out like something from a different life, there was nothing else. When he pulled back, the expression on his face was not one she had seen before. Something breaking open, something almost afraid. I'm sorry, he said, stepping back. That was a mistake. And he walked away. She stood there. A mistake. The word sat in her chestless tone. She was a mistake to him. Just like every other woman he'd touched and walked away from. She was something he'd done and regretted. She had let herself feel something for him. She could admit that now, standing alone in this kitchen, she had let herself feel something. And she was a mistake. She watched the tears fall from her eyes and didn't wipe them away immediately, because there was no one to see them. And she thought she was allowed to feel this for exactly 60 seconds before she put it away. She put it away. After the kiss, the mansion became something else entirely. Not hostile, never that, just calibrated. She kept to her tasks. He was rarely home, and when he was, they were correct with each other in the way of two people who have agreed, without speaking, to carry something difficult and not set it down where the other can see. She caught him watching her sometimes. Just the edge of his attention, quickly redirected when she turned. She watched him too, when he couldn't see her. She didn't know what she was looking for. Something that confirmed she'd been right to feel what she felt. Something that confirmed she was wrong. He still knew when she was sad. She didn't know how he managed that, given how rarely they spoke. But she would be sitting somewhere trying to figure out Kofi's next round of bills, and he would appear in the doorway and say, "Have you eaten?" In that flat voice that wasn't asking about food. She always said yes. He always looked at her for a second too long before he left. She was done, she told herself. She was completely done. She met him in her advanced marketing theory class in the 4th month of the semester. His name was Yoo Sang-yoon. He was Korean. Her age, with an easy smile and a way of explaining things that made her feel like he was actually interested in whether she understood. He asked if she wanted to study together after class. She said yes. He was kind. Genuinely, simply kind. The kind that didn't seem to want anything from her, that wasn't performance or strategy or a long game. He asked about Birmingham. He listened when she talked about Kofi. He brought her coffee without making it significant. He laughed at her jokes. She found herself looking forward to their study sessions. She found herself texting back quickly. She found herself sitting across from him in the university library, thinking, this is what it should feel like. Easy, light. Something that doesn't cost you anything to want. She wasn't in love with him. She knew the difference by now. But she's liked him, and she needed to move forward, and Sang-yoon was a direction that made sense. What she didn't know was that the day she told Rio she had a date, Rio would feel it land in his chest like a fist. It was a Friday evening. Rio came home at 6:30 and immediately knew something was different. The house had been prepared for his return. Everything in order, his dinner arranged. But Odessa was not in the kitchen or in the main room. He called her name. She appeared at the top of the stairs. He lost every word in his head. She was wearing a dress the color of peonies, soft pink, fitted, with a neckline that was tasteful and somehow devastating anyway. Her curls were down and full around her face. She'd done something with her eyes that made them look enormous, and her lips were just slightly deeper than usual. She looked, standing at the top of those stairs, like something he had no language for. He stared at her. 1 second, 2, 5. I'll be back by 11, she said, and her voice was completely even, as if she were not standing there looking like that, as if his face were not doing something he couldn't control. I've gotten everything ready for you. She came down the stairs. He found words. Where are you going? It's not safe to be out at this. I have a date, she said simply, and walked past him toward the front door. She stepped outside and pulled the door closed behind her and stood on the front steps for a moment, breathing the night air. Because the tension she had just walked out of had been so thick, she was surprised it hadn't been visible. She walked to the car, waiting at the gate, and got in and thought, for the first 40 seconds of the drive, about the way he had looked at her. She stopped thinking about it. She was going on a date. She was moving forward. This was the right thing. Inside the mansion, Sryo sat down slowly on the couch. He stayed there for a long time. He thought about the dress, the stairs, the completely unhurried way she'd said, I have a date. He thought about the feeling currently occupying his chest, the specific, unbearable weight of it, and understood that it had a name. He was not ready to say the name. He sat with it in the dark. What Odessa didn't know, what she wouldn't know for some time, was that Ryo had his driver take him out that night, that he found the restaurant where Sang-yoon had booked the table, that he sat at the bar with a drink he barely touched and watched through the wide restaurant window as Odessa laughed at something Sang-yoon said. A real laugh, her head tilting back, her whole face changing, and felt something in him go completely, utterly wrong. He watched her for 2 hours. He watched the way she talked with her hands. He watched the way she listened, leaning forward slightly. He watched a date he had no right to be furious about and was furious about anyway. He drove home before she did and was sitting in the main room when she came in. She stopped when she saw him. You waited up. You're now going on dates, he said, and his voice came out flat and careful. What happened to focusing on school? I'm an adult, she said. I can manage both. She moved to go. He caught her hand before she could walk away. He pulled her gently, just enough to stop her momentum, and she turned back, and they were close again. That terrible, specific closeness that kept happening between them. And she was looking at him, and he was looking at her, and every single thing he had ever decided about his life felt very far away. She felt it too. She could see it in him, and that was exactly the problem. She pulled her hand back. You don't get to do this, she said, and her voice broke on the first word, and she pushed through it. You bring a different woman home every other day. You kissed me and called it a mistake. You don't get to look at me like that and hold my hand and then go back to being whatever you've been since that night. You don't get to do this to me. Her eyes were bright. She would not let the tears fall. He said her name. She walked away. Next, he stood there with her name still in the air and did nothing, because he didn't know how to do the right thing and keep her safe at the same time, and he was beginning to understand that he had left it too long, and she had found someone else, and it was his own fault. He had been watching Sang-yoon since the second week. Initially, it was jealousy, pure and humiliating, having his people run quiet surveillance on a man his maid was dating, like someone who had lost their mind. But then, one of his people came back with something that was not about jealousy at all. Sang-yoon had been seen twice with men connected to the No family, the Mafia family, whose daughter, No Dahye, had been selected as Ryo's future wife by an arrangement he had been refusing to acknowledge. The No family, who were not accustomed to being refused, who had people everywhere, who had made it their business to know what Ryo's business was. And Sang-yoon was asking Odessa very specific questions about her employer, about his habits, about whether he was serious about anyone. Odessa came to him. She found him in his study, which surprised him. She had been avoiding him for 3 days. I need to talk to you, she said. Me too, he said. They looked at each other across the desk. Your boyfriend is a spy, Ryo said. She didn't look shocked enough for someone who hadn't suspected. How do you know that? I've been. He stopped, took a breath. I've been watching him. She went very still, watching him. Watching you both, he said, and did not look away from her face. Before you say anything, you've been following me? Her voice was quiet. Careful. The kind of careful that meant something was happening underneath. You're in danger, he said. That's why I'm telling you. I'm in danger, she repeated slowly. She turned toward the door. Odessa. His voice came out differently. Not commanding, not controlled. Afraid. She had never heard it sound like that. She stopped. He stood up, walked to her. He stood close, not to overwhelm her, but because the distance felt impossible, and looked at her in the way that always stopped her breathing. "You need to leave Seoul," he said quietly. "I'm not leaving Seoul." Her voice was steady. Her eyes weren't quite. "I'm not leaving my scholarship, my classes. I am the reason you need to go," he said. She searched his face. "Why? What did you do?" The silence was long enough that she thought he wasn't going to answer. "Because I love you," he said. Not like a gift, not like a romantic declaration, like a man reading a diagnosis he had been putting off for months and finally had to say out loud. "And my loving you is what's making you dangerous to the wrong people." She looked at him. Her face moved through several things before it settled. "You love me," she said. Not a question, needing to hear it again. He brought his hand up and held her face, carefully, the way you hold something you don't want to damage, and kissed her, fully, without apology, without the brakes he'd been pressing for months. This time, when he broke away, he did not a mistake. He just looked at her with the particular expression of a man who has run out of resistance and is not sorry about it. "Yes," he said quietly. The bang on the door came at 7 in the morning. No, Dahe did not knock the way people who are waiting for an answer knock. She knocked the way people knock when the door is already an inconvenience. By the time Ryo opened it, she was already stepping inside, dressed in a cream coat that cost more than most people's rent. Her expression, the precise temperature of someone who has been patient longer than they intended. "You've been ignoring my calls," she said. "You've been ignoring the fact that I'm uninterested," he said. Dahai had a face designed for boardrooms, beautiful and absolutely unreadable. She walked into his main room with the proprietary ease of someone who intended to be there eventually and had decided to skip the waiting. She assessed the space. She was about to say something when Odessa appeared. Odessa had heard the door. She came out of the hallway in Ryo's shirt, long on her curls loose, one shoulder visible. She stopped when she saw the woman in the main room. The woman in the cream coat looked at Ryo, looked at Odessa, looked at Ryo's face. "She's the reason," Dahai said, almost to herself. "I've had people asking her questions for weeks, and she was the answer the whole time." Her voice was not angry. It was something colder than anger. She moved toward the door. She was leaving. Ryo's mind ran the numbers in under a second. Dahai, leaving like this, furious, to report to her father that she'd been refused for a maid, and what her family would do with that information. What they would do to Odessa. "Wait," he said. "I'll marry you." The room went absolutely silent. Odessa heard the words. She felt them pass through her like something cold. She looked at him, holding the door, his hand out toward No Dahai, saying he would marry another woman, and thought, so this is what it is. She was a hookup, like any other. She was her father's voice in her head. He went for anything and none of it was ever real. "So I'm just a hookup," she said. Her voice came out quiet, flat, like the others. Dahai paused at the door. She looked back at Ryo's face, the way it changed the instant Odessa spoke, and understood something. She walked out. She had all the information she needed. Ryo crossed the room in 4 steps. He stood in front of Odessa and took her face in both hands and looked at her with an expression that was not controlled, not calculated, not anything she had seen from him before. "Nothing about you is random to me," he said. "Not 1 second of any of this." The tears on her face were already falling. She hadn't noticed. "Then what was that?" she asked. "I was trying to keep her in the room," he said. "Because the second she leaves here angry, you become a target." She stared at him. "Sit down," he said gently. "I need to tell you everything." He told her all of it. He told her about his brother, about Taiseo and Yorim, about the family's intervention, about what happened to Yorim after the family made their position clear. She had been hurt, not killed. The Gong family had limits, but hurt enough to send a message. Hurt enough that Taiseo had never looked at the world the same way again. He told her about the No family, about the debt, about the arrangement that had been building for 2 years, gaining pressure, gaining urgency, until the No patriarch had sat across from Ryo's father and said, in a voice designed to leave no room, "Your son will marry my daughter, or the consequences will begin immediately." And when men like that said consequences, they did not mean inconvenience. He told her about Sang-yun, about what his people had found. Sang-yun's connection to the nose, the questions he'd been asking, the information being filtered back. The No family had known about Odessa for weeks. They had been watching to understand what she was to him, and now they knew. "They'll hurt you," he said. It was not a prediction. It was a fact being delivered. "Not to hurt you, to hurt me. That's how they operate." She was quiet for a long time. He watched her process it. Could see her working through it, the scholarship, Seoul, her brother's bills, the life she had built here piece by piece. "I'm not leaving," she said, but her voice had less certainty than the words. "Odessa, I have classes. I have." She stopped, started again. "If I leave, the scholarship." "I will handle the scholarship," he said. "I will handle the bills. I will handle everything that needs handling. But I need you somewhere they cannot reach you." "And what about you?" she asked. "If I leave, you marry her." He didn't answer immediately. That was its own kind of answer. "I'm not marrying anyone," he said finally. "But I cannot fight that war and keep you safe at the same time. I cannot do both." She looked at him for a long moment. She was not a woman who cried easily, but she had cried twice in front of him now, and she was close to a third time, and she hated it. "How long?" she said. "I don't know. You're asking me to leave everything I came here for." "I'm asking you to stay alive," he said. "I will fix the rest. I promise you I will fix the rest." She looked at his face. The tension in it, the thing underneath the control that was not control at all, but something much rawer, and believed him. She was not sure she should. She believed him anyway. "Okay," she said quietly. They moved fast. He told her to pack only what she needed. She moved through her room with the same efficiency she'd arrived with. She was good at distilling her life down to what could be carried. 2 bags, the texts that mattered, and the photograph of Kofi she kept on her bedside table. He drove her himself, no driver. He didn't speak much on the way, and neither did she, which was its own kind of conversation. All the things that didn't need words between two people who had spent months learning each other's silences. At the terminal, he carried one of her bags to the check-in. When it was done, and there was nothing left to do but go through security, they stood facing each other in the middle of the airport, with people moving around them on all sides. She looked at him. He looked back. There was so much to say, and no time left to say it, which is the particular cruelty of airports. They give you a deadline and call it departure. He kissed her. Not frantic, not desperate. Slow and deliberate and honest, the way people kiss when they're trying to say something language can't carry. She kissed him back the same way. When they separated, she kept her eyes closed for a second before she opened them. "Call me the moment you land," he said. His voice was very quiet. "I will," she said. She picked up her bag. She walked toward the security line without looking back, because she knew if she looked back, she would stop. And she could not stop. He watched her go. He watched the way she moved. That particular unhurried steadiness that had caught his attention the very first day. And he watched her reach the line, hand over her boarding pass, step through. He watched until there was nothing left to watch. He stood there in the middle of the airport for a moment longer than he needed to. Around him, people moved and rushed and announced departures in voices that echoed off the high ceiling. And Gong Ryo, who had decided at 17 that he would not love anything he could lose, stood perfectly still and felt the full weight of what it cost to have changed his mind. He turned and walked back to his car. He had work to do, and he was going to fix every single thing that needed fixing before her plane landed. That is where I am leaving you today, besties. On a man standing alone in an airport who has just put the most important person in his life on a plane to keep her safe, and now has to dismantle a mafia arrangement, settle a family debt, and face the most dangerous family in Seoul before she answers his call. Drop a comment right now. Are you Team Rio, or did he wait too long? Did Odessa make the right decision getting on that plane? And where are you watching from? I want to know every single one of you. Hit that subscribe button and turn on your notifications, because part 2 is coming, and I promise you, what happens when that phone doesn't ring is going to break you wide open. Don't leave. I'll see you in the next one.